Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope that you guys all had a happy holiday if you celebrate. Hope that you got some time off of work or school or whatever you're doing and had a nice little break. I know that I have, and I got a lot of reading done in December because of that. So, I guess first things first, I want to talk about I want to do some channel housekeeping. I know I've only posted 2 videos so far. I'd like to get into the habit of posting videos more frequently. I think that posting like weekly videos, I don't remember if I talked about this in my last video or not. I think that posting weekly videos is going to be too difficult for me. That's not an easy goal for me to achieve. So I think what I'm going to plan on doing is like monthly wrap up style videos and maybe the occasional video like extra thing where I talk about something else. Like I want to do like a top books of 2022 retrospective kind of thing. But in general, I think I want to consistently post one wrap up video every month. Yeah, so that's what this is going to be. This is going to be my wrap up for December 2022. I read 9 books total, including audiobooks this month, which is actually that's a lot for me. This is probably the month where I've read the most stuff this year because I think in total I was looking at my Goodreads statistics earlier today. I read less than 40 books total this year, so that's like a good portion of them are coming from this month. So anyway, let me talk about them. Okay, so the first book that I want to talk about is The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy. I read this in November, actually, not December. I ended up not finishing it, and I put it down like the very last day of November, I think. So I'm going to include it in this video because I haven't talked about it yet on this channel, except for really briefly in my first video when I first started to read it. So yeah, Cormac McCarthy, obviously very popular author, very well known. I have put off reading Cormac McCarthy forever. I talked about it a little bit in my first video. I've always kind of thought that he sounded like he was not an author for me. But I read The Road earlier this year, and I actually really liked The Road. I read it because I found it for like $1 in Goodwill. And I liked The Road. So after I liked The Road, I pre-ordered this. It came in the mail, and I started reading it. And I gotta say, I did not love this book too much. So it follows this guy, Bobby Western, who is, his sister died a few years prior to the time of this taking place. That's not really a spoiler, it happens on the first page. He used to race Formula 2 cars. Now he's like a deep sea salvage diver. And there's a plane that wrecks in the beginning of the book, and there's a missing passenger on the plane, and this is kind of really, none of these events are important because there isn't really a plot to this book. Like, it's set up to kind of make you think that it's like a thriller and there is some kind of plot, but there isn't a plot to this really. The book is structured in a kind of interesting way where, let me find the beginning of a chapter. So every chapter is sort of like split into 2 parts. The first part is kind of this, I don't know if you can hear me behind the book. The first part is this italicized text. That's usually like, I don't know, a couple to like 10 pages of this italicized text. And that's following his sister Alicia and her conversations with this imagined character, the thalidomide kid, and his like troupe of like weird circus freaks that he has following him around. I mean, they're all like in her head. So that's like how one part of the chapter goes. And then the other part of the chapter is like written like normal text, right? It's not italicized. Am I showing her normal one? Yeah. This is like normal text, not italicized. And it follows Bobby as he goes to bars a lot. He meets people for lunch. It's lots of eating and conversations. The conversations tend to have these like philosophical bents about like I don't even remember because it's been so long since I read it, and none of the conversations actually stuck with me too much. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that kind of, it sounds like it's trying to be deep, but really none of it really struck a chord with me. It all kind of seemed like stuff that I would have thought was like really cool and edgy when I was 16, but doesn't really strike a chord anymore. That if it was just the Bobby Western sections, I probably would have finished it to the end because they're not terrible. But the sections that are italicized about Alicia, I found really painful to read. Like, I found them embarrassingly bad, just very poorly written. This like really bad trope of this like, you know, evil the thalidomide kid is this like evil circus clown there's this like there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager. I think I talked about this in my first video, but there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager where the crew comes across these people on like a deserted planet that are in a stasis pod, and like they try to wake them up, but it's connected to this computer and they can't wake them up because like I don't remember the plot of the Voyager episode, but for whatever reason, Janeway and a couple other of the crew members have to like go into stasis pods themselves. Actually, I don't remember if Janeway goes in. I think Janeway goes in. Anyway, they have to go into the stasis pods, and there's this like AI like circus carnival ringleader guy who's like sadistic and playing these games with the trapped crew members in there. And anyway, that's what this section reminded me of. But Star Trek did it better. And if Star Trek Voyager is doing it better than Cormac McCarthy, like I mean, I love Voyager. I just didn't get a lot out of this book. I found it really painful to read. I found some of his sentences to be just really bad too. Like people were talking about, well, people always talk about how great McCarthy's prose is, and I did like the prose in The Road. I thought it was good. I thought it was really sparse and minimal, which I guess is not how his style always is, but also really effective in The Road. Like I liked The Road a lot. This book, I thought that like I would have told him to rewrite parts of it because they're just bad if I was his editor. Like I don't know. I know some people love this book. I did not like it. I couldn't finish it. Since I liked The Road so much, I am still interested in reading some more Cormac McCarthy. So I think I'm going to read. I want to read Blood Meridian because it's so popular. I'm not that psyched about Blood Meridian, honestly. I also want to read the Border Trilogy, which sounds good. And then maybe I'll come back to this book again after that. I got the second book too. I don't know if you can see it on my shelf. Probably not. But I ordered both of them, so I have both of them. I don't know. Wasn't too thrilled with it. Probably my least favorite thing I've read this year. All right, the next thing that I read is this short story collection by Helen DeWitt from 2018, I think, called Some Trick. This is a collection of 13 stories. It says it right there for me. I don't even have to count. That all are not only thematically similar, like they're all kind of similar stories. They all follow like artists, creative people, writers who struggle to remain faithful to their art while also making a living, and are just frustrated with having to make art in this world. Really, what I took away from it, it's kind of like about bullshit. It's just about the bullshit that exists in society that stops us from being able to produce the kinds of things that we would want to produce. Like there's bullshit you have to go through in order to, like, you have to make a living. Unless you're independently wealthy, the stuff that you produce and create needs to be marketable and saleable. And not only, so there's that level of bullshit, and then you have to jump through hoops of like editors and publishers, and like you need to find someone to help you to just the bullshit that you have to go through, not even to make money off of something, but just to like get something out to an audience that will see it. You have to jump through hoops of bullshit. And then there's also just the bullshit of being a person. Like you live somewhere. You have to take care of, like, your toilet gets clogged, your sink starts leaking. Just the bullshit that you have to put up with whenever you talk to another person. And that's ultimately what I think these stories are all kind of about. They're all about how they're about these characters who are dealing with bullshit. And so some of these stories, the first couple stories in here, I thought were hilarious. I loved them. I did kind of, towards the middle of it, get a little sick of them because the stories kind of started feeling repetitive, and some of them just didn't work that well for me, honestly. I'd recommend it. I think that there's some stuff in here that's definitely really good and worth reading. Some of the stories kind of I don't think I'll come back to them, but a few of the stories in here, I think I would pick this up and just read like one or two of the stories again. So the next book I read in December was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I listened to this on Audible, an audiobook narrated by Juliet Stevenson, which I recommend the audiobook a lot. It was really good. It's a social novel. It was serialized over 1854 and 1855 in Charles Dickens' magazine Household Words. It follows this character, Margaret Hale, who is a young woman. She grew up in the south of England in like the countryside. In the beginning of the book, she's actually living with her cousin in London, and then she moves back to her childhood home in the southern English countryside, and then eventually she has to move north to Manchester because her father is a vicar, and he gives up his position and becomes a dissenter. And so they move to the north of England to this town called Milton, which is like a stand-in for Manchester. It's this manufacturing industrial town. I've read many reviews on like Goodreads and Amazon and stuff calling it Pride and Prejudice for socialists, which is kind of true. One of the main themes of this book is that Margaret is this woman from the South, and she moves north, and she has to overcome her prejudices against the northern people there and against living in this manufacturing town. And similarly, a lot of the manufacturing people have to overcome prejudices against this Londoner who they see as like stuck up and snobbish. It was a really, really good novel. The characterizations in it are amazing. Like, the characters are unforgettable. Margaret Hale herself is a really good character. Mr. Thornton, the mill owner, is an amazing character. His mother is a brilliant character. I think both Mr. Thornton and his mother are these characters who you kind of don't like at first. They espouse these viewpoints that are not good. Mr. Thornton is a mill owner, and he doesn't treat his employees very well. He refers to them as hands, not people, and he doesn't treat them like people. There's a really good conversation that Mr. Thornton, who's a pupil of Margaret's father, because Margaret's father becomes a tutor. So anyway, Mr. Thornton is a pupil of his, and he's over visiting at the Hales' residence, and Mr. Thornton and Margaret get into a conversation. And Margaret is kind of like talking about the conditions of the workers and why Mr. Thornton doesn't treat them better. And it's a really interesting conversation. Like, it's about the responsibilities of the capitalist class, the owners of the means of production. What responsibility do they have to the people that they employ? It's a conversation that we're still having to this day. I mean, lots of things in this book seem like things that we're still talking about to this day. There's a lot of things in this book that we're not talking about anymore too. Anyway, it's very good. Like, the characterizations are good. So you see people across the social spectrum. You meet the Thorntons, who are these mill owners, but even the Thorntons have an origin story where they were poor and they pulled themselves up from their bootstraps, right? And so this is a big part of Mr. Thornton's personality, is that he kind of sees the poor as kind of deserving it, because if he could pull himself up, these people should be able to too. But then Margaret befriends this mill worker, Higgins, and his daughter, Bessie, and they become really, really, really touching characters and really smart and intelligent characters. Higgins ends up becoming like a union leader. It's pretty cool. It's a really interesting book. There's a strike scene at a pretty pivotal moment of the novel, where Margaret is going into Manchester, and there's descriptions of these sounds that are like animalistic or naturalistic, like the sound of birds far away or the sound of the ocean crashing. And as she gets further into the city, like, she sees all of these people there, and it's this really vivid and almost terrifying description of this strike. It's a great scene, the strike scene. I did think that the novel kind of drags a little tiny bit towards the end. I think I read on Wikipedia that when it was serialized, Dickens made her cut some stuff out at the end, and she added that all back in when it was published as a standalone triple decker later. And I think that kind of shows the ending. Also, I am not a big fan of what happens at the end. But yeah, it was a great novel. I'm going to reread it again one day, I'm sure. I recommend it. The next thing I read is Ottessa Moshfegh's short story collection from 2017, Homesick for Another World. I like this short story collection a lot. My girlfriend was sick at the beginning of the month, and I had to take her to some walk-in clinics a few times and some regular doctor appointments. And anyway, I read most of these stories in doctor's office waiting rooms, which was kind of interesting. The stories are all kind of thematically similar. They all kind of follow these characters who are in some way feel alienated from society. Like they feel like they don't fit in with the normies, right? It's really this kind of rejection of things like this cult of self-help, like influencer culture, and and even more than that, things like it's like all of these characters are told they exist in this society where they're told what to desire. They're told what there's how to be healthy, like the things that they have to do to be healthy, and that they're supposed to be healthy. Like this is a thing I should value and desire, is health. And they're told how to do that. They're told what to eat. They're told how to behave, how to be polite, all of these things. And for whatever various reasons, like the characters reject these norms that they're told that they have to follow. One of the things that I think Ottessa Moshfegh is really, really good at is invoking this feeling of disgust. And I think that there's a lot of commentary about this. Like, this isn't an original insight of mine. Lots of people talking about Ottessa Moshfegh's work talk about how disgusting it is. And I don't think it's not... I don't think that this isn't like Story of the Eye, right? Like, you're not going to be reading this and be like absolutely like disgusted by it, revolted. It's not about revulsion. It's about looking at the things that society considers disgusting as a way to like escape the control of society. That's how I read it, at least. Like, these characters all kind of seek solace in things that are disgusting because they kind of have like their own freedom then. Like, they by doing things that are disgusting, they're desiring things of their own will. They're not desiring the things that they're told to desire. Anyway, I like it a lot. I thought it was a really fun read. Probably not one of my favorite things I've read the year overall, but it's very good. I'd recommend it. Okay, the next book I read was The Netanyahus by Joshua Cohen. I listened to this as an audiobook on Audible again. I highly, highly recommend this as an audiobook. I think it was probably the best produced audiobook I've listened to this year. It's narrated by Joshua Cohen himself, along with, there's a couple of chapters that are like letters from other characters, and those chapters are narrated by guest narrators. One of them is David Duchovny. I don't remember who the other one was. But yeah, the narration itself is great. And there's also like musical interludes between the chapters, and there's sound effects and stuff. It's almost like a radio play at times. It was really, really a really entertaining audiobook. So what this book is, it follows a Jewish historian named Reuben Blum, who works at a small liberal arts college in upstate New York. He's the first Jew ever at this college, like in terms of in the faculty or the student body. He's the first one. It takes place in the early 1950s. Reuben gets placed on a hiring committee, and the candidate that's coming in, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the father of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, Reuben has to chaperone him around on his visit. And so Benzian ends up showing up with his entire family in tow with him. They're very dysfunctional, and Reuben is kind of like they can't. Their car broke down on the way. It's actually like their friend's car that they borrowed, and they crashed it on the way. And they cancel their hotel reservation, so they're stuck having to stay with Reuben at his house. Reuben has to host him. So Reuben Blum is based on Harold Bloom, the famous literary critic who was a friend of Joshua Cohen's and told Joshua Cohen this real story about when Harold Bloom had to host Benjamin Netanyahu at his house. Anyway, this was one of the best books that I read this year. It was very, very funny and also very serious. So it's kind of like, it's a mix of like campus novel and like Seinfeld and the Three Stooges and like history lesson, and also just like, it's this really great combination of both. It's got really deep and important themes, and it's also has like toilet humor, and like it's and also like good social comedy too, like Jane Austen type social comedy. it really bridges this like highbrow, lowbrow gap really well. Oh, and the prose itself is like phenomenal. I'd never read Joshua Cohen before. I think he must be like one of the best contemporary stylists as a prose writer. He's brilliant. So yeah, this book, it's really really funny. I mean, especially in the audiobook, there's a scene where Reuben's in-laws are visiting for the holidays, and they're in Reuben's bedroom, which is he's giving them his bedroom for his in-laws to stay in. And so he's showing his mother-in-law the bedroom. His mother-in-law is like berating him for being a pushover. And meanwhile, in the adjoining bathroom, his father-in-law is in there, and like as his mother-in-law and him are having this argument, well, really, it's not even really an argument. It's his mother-in-law is berating him basically. As this is going on, their conversation is like interjected with like the sounds of bowel movements and like toilet paper rolls spinning, and like there's a plunger getting plunged at one point, and then like the toilet flushes a bunch of times. And as this is going on, like the audiobook is like recreating all of these sounds and sound effect as well. It's really really funny. And that's just one. I mean, there's like dozens of funny scenes like this throughout the novel. But it's also really really deep. I mean, it's about Jewish community in America, and what it means, like what Jewish identity in America, like what does it mean to be a Jew in the American diaspora? That's a big question that this book is grappling with. And also about the history of revisionist Zionism. And there's this really hard problem as well that's kind of like played out in miniature between Reuben Blum and Benzian when Benzian comes to visit this house, of this conflict between liberal humanism and like fascism and strong-armed men, like strong men. And it's sort of about like the way that liberal humanism fails to deal with these kinds of strongmen characters and with fascists. Like it fails to deal with Nazis, it fails to deal with the Netanyahus. That's something this book is grappling with. It's also grappling with like philosophy of history. Like there's this conflict between the way that Reuben writes history and the way that Benzian writes history. They're both historians, but what they imagine history is a very different thing. There's also a really interesting afterword where Joshua Cohen kind of breaks the fourth wall. And well, I mean, he does break the fourth wall, and he's talking about the real story told to him by Harold Bloom. And there's this really, the book ends with this letter that Joshua, or I think it's an email, Joshua Cohen emailed Harold Bloom's niece asking for her permission, basically, or her blessing on the manuscript, because one of the characters is like loosely, she's another person who is involved in the story because she was staying with the Blooms at the time. And so he includes her response email like verbatim, unedited, and it's amazing. Anyway, I highly recommend this book. It was one of my favorite things I've read this year. Okay, after that, I read Le Père Goriot by Honoré de Balzac, which is translated as Old Goriot here. So first of all, I love this edition of this book. I think that this is a Penguin classic from the 80s, I think. When was this book printed? This is from 1981. I think that this cover is beautiful. I love the design on it. I love the clean black spine. I like the smell of it. Just like everything about this physical book, I think is fantastic. This is translated by Marion Ayton Crawford. So I've had this book for probably like a decade. I got it at Goodwill a long time ago, and it's been on my shelf forever. I've read Saracen by Balzac, the short story novella that SZ by Bart is based on. Well, I shouldn't say it's based on, it analyzes. And I really liked Saracen. I thought that was a fantastic story, and I've been meaning to read more Balzac, but I never got around to it until now. So this book is published in 1835, and it takes place a little bit before. I think it takes place in 1819. If I remember right. It is 1819, the time when this drama begins. So yes, 1819 this takes place. So that's during the Bourbon Restoration, after the Revolution had happened, after Napoleon is gone too. So we've got the king is back. So it takes place at this cheap boarding house, Maison Vauquer, and it mainly follows the story of two of the boarders who are living there. One is this young law student named Rastignac, and he is like a social climber. He's a law student, and he wants to make his way into high society. And so he has a cousin, Madame de Beauséant, who is wealthy. She's titled. I forget what her title is. I think maybe she's a duchess. Maybe I don't remember. But anyway, he has a cousin who's rich and an aristocrat, and he sort of like indulges himself to her, and she helps him kind of like enter society. And what she tells him is that, like, yeah, if you want to get into society, what you need to do is find a rich woman and like become her man, and like get her to fall for her, seduce her, right? He meets this woman, Madame Resto, I think was her name, at a ball that Madame de Beauséant is hosting. And he goes and calls on her the next day and kind of like makes a fool of himself. He makes a fool of himself because he doesn't know like the propriety of high society. He doesn't know how to behave there. And so at that point, he goes to Madame de Beauséant is like, I need you to train me. And then eventually he goes to the opera or the theater with Madame de Beauséant, and he sees this woman there, Madame de Nucingen, who he becomes enamored with, and he tries to seduce her. He actually does. Well, I was gonna say he actually falls in love with her, but a big thing in this book is that people kind of it's very hard to tell what people's real motives and real feelings are, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But anyway, so Rastignac wants to get into high society, and he does that by trying to like seduce some upper class women. And it turns out that these upper class women that he's interested in are both the daughters of one of the other boarders who lives at the Maison Vauquer with him. This guy named Goriot, who is this old retired former pasta entrepreneur who became wealthy through his pasta manufacturing business, his vermicelli business. And at this point, though, he's like living in squalor in this boarding house because he gives all of his money to his daughters to finance their lifestyle, basically. So what did I like about this book? I liked a lot. I thought the descriptions were absolutely amazing. The first like 20 or 30 pages are just this description of the boarding house and of the boarders in it, these like minute physical descriptions of like the things hanging on the wall and the kinds of food that they're eating and the smell of the boarding house. It's very, I'm not someone who like sees things when I read a lot. Like I don't imagine things visually usually when I'm reading, but like I feel like I knew this place. Like I felt like I was transported to 1819 Paris. And then similarly, the descriptions of just the wealth and the luxury and the lavishness of the palaces that these wealthy people are living in was amazing too. And it really, it's like, this is the thing that struck me about this book is the extreme wealth disparity between the like obscene wealth of the wealthy people and the absolute squalor of like everyone else. Not even it's like the only thing that exists is poverty and extraordinary, like obscene, offensive levels of wealth. And so that was one of the things that I took away from this is that I've never read anything else from the Bourbon Restoration period. And it kind of amazes me that like 20 years after the Revolution, 20, 30 years, people are like, there's this much wealth disparity already, and that like these rich people aren't afraid of getting their heads lopped off. Like, it's amazing to me because it's really disgusting the like levels of inequality that are portrayed in this book. The other thing is that I was expecting, so I went into this expecting it to be kind of like a Dickensian social novel, and that is not really at all what it is. It's very different from Dickens. So I go into a Dickens novel, I come out of a Dickens novel feeling kind of like there's a pathos and a sentimentality to Dickens. and an optimism in like human goodness, and that things will get better. Like people will treat people better if they can, and like things can improve. Most people at their core are good in Dickens' world. In Balzac's world, first of all, the income, the inequality is like ratcheted up another level beyond Dickens. Balzac is also just a much more cynical reader of humanity. There is no goodness in this novel. There's no human goodness at all. It's every single person, whether rich or poor, in this novel is out to throw their neighbors under the bus in order to lift themselves up. Like it's a Paris in this novel is an insanely cutthroat society, and it's like you have to kill or be killed, and everyone in this society is just awful. They're rotten. There is no goodness here. The other thing that I found interesting about this is that in the beginning, before, so the first like 20 or 30 pages, like I said, are mostly a description of the Maison Vauquer. But there's a couple of pages in the very beginning where he kind of like gives a preamble about what this work is going to be. And he says like, this isn't a romance. I'm describing real life here. These are real people. And I know that Balzac is kind of considered like a proto-realist, or like one of the first realists. But I didn't really come across, to me, this didn't feel too much like a realist novel, in that none of these characters really felt like real characters to me. They kind of all felt like pawns, like caricatures that Balzac is like moving around for his drama. Really, it felt more like watching like a stage play almost, is how I felt reading this. The characters all seemed kind of flat. It wasn't real. I was also expecting it to be kind of like funny, because like Dickens is funny sometimes, but Dickens is funny a lot. What am I talking about? And I thought maybe it'd be like some Austen kind of comedy too, but I really didn't find this very funny. Mostly I came away from this book feeling kind of disgusted. It leaves you very unhopeful. Like it's just a very unoptimistic book, very pessimistic and cynical. I am still interested in reading more Balzac though, because some of it I did like. And I shouldn't say that I disliked it because it was disgusting. I mean, I did like it. I think it did a really good job in making me like hate that society and like be absolutely disgusted with it. So yeah, I'm interested in reading more Balzac. I did, in the last NYRB sale, I got like a collection of his short stories and of some short stories and novellas by him. So I think that's what I'm going to pick up next. I also have a copy of Lost Illusions, but I don't think I'm ready for that level of commitment with Balzac at this point. Okay, after that, the next audiobook I listened to was Appointment in Samarra by John O'Hara. This was published in 1934. It's set a few years earlier, like the early 30s, I think, during Prohibition, in like country club land, Midwest suburbia, like upper middle class kind of area. It's set like around a few days around Christmas. I think like the day before Christmas and the day after. I think it's set over 3 days, maybe 4 days. And it follows Julian English, this guy who owns a Cadillac dealership, and he goes to the country club, he goes to some parties, he gets drunk, he makes some poor life decisions, and that's basically the book, is following his downfall. It was good. I liked it a lot. I listened to this at the same time that I was reading Père Goriot, and I think that they complemented each other well. They're both kind of like looking at social class, and about like, you know, striving to get yourself into society. I think that Appointment in Samarra was a better novel. I liked it a lot more. It's much more psychologically rich and deep than Père Goriot, I thought. The characters all seemed very real to me. What I liked the most about this book is that it seemed like a very, very authentic portrayal of this time in America, in this place in the Midwest. Like these people would have been about Julian would have been the age of my great grandfather, and my great grandfather was living in upstate New York, like a similar kind of area. Um, he would have been a lot poorer than Julian, I think. But I mean, another thing like Père Goriot, this book kind of contains characters from all strata of this town in Pennsylvania. I thought that was really cool. It's not a time period that I've known a lot about. I thought this was a very good description of it. I liked the book. It was good. I'd be interested in reading more about John O'Hara, more from John O'Hara. It sounds like, from what I read, he was really well known for his short stories. He wrote for the New Yorker. So I think I might try and pick up a short story collection from him later. This year, I want to try and read more short stories. That's one of my reading goals for the year. After that, I read Beowulf. I read the Seamus Heaney translation. So I've read Beowulf a bunch of times. This is probably my fourth reading of Beowulf, because I read it in high school. It may even be my fifth. I read it in high school. I read it a few times in college. I've never read the Seamus Heaney translation, though, which is really popular. I liked it. I mean, it's Beowulf. I love Beowulf. It's a fantastic poem. If you haven't read Beowulf, you should. It will probably take you a few hours to read this. I mean, it looks like it's big, but really, let me find a good example. So every page is sort of like on one page you have the Old English, and then on the other page you have the translation. So it's like 100, 200 pages, but really it's like 100 pages of verse that you're going through. It's like 3,000 lines of poetry. And Heaney's translation is very readable, it's modern, but it still sounds epic, heroic. It sounds contemporary, but at the same time, old. It's good. I recommend the translation. I'm really interested in reading the newish translation by Maria Davana Headley, the one where she translates "what" as "bro." Which I thought was, when I first heard that, I was like, this seems dumb. This seems like a meme or something. But I actually heard an excerpt from it on the Backlisted podcast a couple weeks ago. I was listening in my car, and it was amazing. It blew me away. It was a fantastic sounding translation. So I think next year I'm going to read that. I think I'd like to make a tradition of every year, the couple days after Christmas, I'll reread Beowulf, because I don't know if I got around to saying it. I was starting to. It's a really fast read. You can read this in a day easily. You can read it over a few hours. Yeah, and then the other thing that I finished reading was Warlock by Oakley Hall. I've been reading this book since September, because I've been reading it on my Kindle, and I don't read on my Kindle very often. I read a chapter a night before I go to bed. So Warlock is a Western. It's set in the end of the 1800s, around I think the late 1880s, early 1890s. It was published in 1958. It takes place in this southwestern border town near the border with Mexico. That's kind of it's on the frontier. It's not an incorporated town yet. It's lawless, and it's kind of the town's struggles with their independence, kind of, and the anarchy that surrounds it, and what it means to bring law into this town. Whose job is it to decide if someone should live or die, or if someone is good or bad, and how we bring peace and stability to an area, and how violence is a part of that or not a part of that. And there's also some really interesting stuff about there's the town is set up. It's a mining town. There's a mine in the area. There's a few mines there, silver mines, and so the vast majority of the people in the town they're either mine workers, are the majority of the people, or they're small business owners, or they're the mine owners. And so there's this conflict between the miners and the mine owner. MacDonald is his name, throughout the book, that kind of comes to a head near the end. It was really, really good. It's one of Thomas Pynchon, has one of the few things that he said is that he loves this book, and that when he was in college at Cornell, am I remembering that right? I don't remember where he went to college, but they had a cult of Oakley Hall around Warlock in his class, because everyone loved it. It was a really good book. I recommend it. I don't know if I've ever read a Western before, but this has got me really, really interested in reading more Westerns. It was a really, really good book, really fun. I have to figure out what I'm going to read next on my Kindle. That's on my agenda for today, is to pick out another book. Yeah, so that's all the stuff I read. I'm reading a couple little things now. I'm reading this Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. You can see I'm at that point, which is, I mean, this is a tiny book, and the words are also like pretty big. So I will probably finish this tonight or tomorrow morning. It's interesting. I'll give my thoughts in another video in next month. The other thing, I'm listening to If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. That is, well, I'll give my thoughts in the next video. I'm about halfway through it right now, so that'll be in my January wrap-up, I'm sure. Anyway, I think I've gone on long enough. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Yeah, leave a comment if you've read any of these, or if you have anything that you would recommend based on what I've been reading. I'm going to post another video, hopefully sometime soon. I've been like taking some notes on it and stuff about my year of reading in 2022, and like a retrospective on it, and my reading goals for next year, and just come like a list of my top books of the year. So that should be coming out pretty soon, I hope. Yeah. Have a good day. I hope that you all have a great New Year. It's New Year's Eve right now. So yeah, have a wonderful 2023, and I will see you guys later.